This is Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. Future Sense Now is brought to you by the Futures Forum. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
How will we share the future? How will we share our future? And to my mind, there are some 30 planetary challenges requiring our global coordination and our global commitment. Now imagine, if you will, this blue marble called Earth as a spaceship hurtling through time. And the Quartermaster's report says air quality in decline, availability of safe potable water in decline, habitat quantity, quality, and diversity in decline, commercial fish stocks in decline, population of non-human vertebrate species in decline, population of assessed plant species in decline, and none of this passively reversible. If you are crew on this spaceship, what would you do? Well, in this book, This Spaceship Earth, author and futurist David Houle offers some ideas about how we might create a paradigm shift to help us journey through this time in Earth's history, the Earth century, as he called it, when we as humans must make a determined decision to turn around and reverse the boundaries that we are approaching so that we can survive as a species. So join me now on this next edition of Future Sense Now, where we will speak with futurist and author David Houle. Greetings and welcome to another edition of Future Sense Now. This day is the day before the People's Climate March, and we have with us on this edition David Houle, who is known as the corporate futurist, or the corporate CEO's futurist rather. He's also author of a new book, This Spaceship Earth. Actually, David has authored many books before about the shift of the Earth, but we'll get into that when we start speaking to him. We have him today because he's working on an exciting new project called This Spaceship Earth. So welcome, David, and let's get right into it.
Good morning, welcome.
I met you some years ago at one of the World Future Society conferences, and I don't even know how we met by phone, to be quite honest. I think I read about your book, and I noticed, I was very excited to see this kind of shift towards looking just at it from a corporate space as a futurist, working in a corporate space, to now looking at our planetary civilization and the planetary things that need to happen. What led you to this kind of shift from just talking to corporations to now talking to people?
Good question. So Claire, This Spaceship Earth was my 7th book, and I've co-authored several. So I'm a futurist and guest lecturer at the Ringling College of Art and Design. So that means I guest lectures. And one of the professors I kept coming back to, excuse me, was Tim Rummage, who was the co-author of my book. And he's the head of environmental studies at Ringling College of Art and Design here in Sarasota. And I went to the first Earth Day, and I've written a lot about alternative and renewable energy, the interconnectedness of the planet. So I said, do you want to write a book about climate change? He said, yeah. And what really happened was it took us 2 years to do it, partly because he's an academic and we were both busy. But in those 2 years, Claire, all the forecasts, say from 1990 about what would happen in 2050 were starting to happen. And in the second year, it was from what was forecast in 2000 starting to happen. So Tim Rummage is the head of environmental studies at Ringling College, and he really is the smartest guy I've ever met about the interconnectedness of everything relative to climate and the Earth. So I said, let's write a book, and it took us 2 years to write it. And in those 2 years, I realized, that climate change as a futurist, it would be a dereliction of my professional duty if I did not talk about climate change, because climate change is the single greatest existential threat to humanity. So the reason we came up with the name was, as you know, as a fellow futurist, in 1968, our Buckminster Fuller wrote a book called Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth. And he said that we, humanity, needed to come up with an operating manual for Spaceship Earth. And if we didn't, there would be problems ahead. Yeah. And that was in 68, 69. And then 1970, on Earth Day, Marshall McLuhan, another one of my favorite futurists, came out with the famous line that stuck with me forever: there are no passengers on Spaceship Earth. Yes. We're all crew, right? Yes.
The powerful line, very powerful line.
Yeah, because, you know, all of a sudden it put the, you know, if you think about a spaceship, it's an entity that doesn't get resupplied. Same thing with the Earth. And then in 1970, and this is what really, you know, and again, I'm a young man reading science fiction and reading all the futurists. Yeah. Our Buckminster Fuller came out with a second book called Utopia or Oblivion. And he said, in several decades, humanity will approach a fork in the road if it does not create an operating manual for Spaceship Earth, utopia or oblivion. And in the 2 years of the research with Tim, who is brilliant, I realized that if we, humanity, do not dramatically change our trajectory and how we live on this planet, there will be no civilization by 2100. We won't be extinct, but there will be no civilization, as you and I know, Claire. Yeah. So we wrote the book. And I was so profoundly affected by the 2 years of research, and I've always been an environmentalist, that we decided to set up a nonprofit. So I have to say, before your next question, is that we are the only climate change global nonprofit that's co-founded by a futurist and a planetary ethicist. And the reason that Tim calls himself a planetary ethicist is that humanity is at the fork in the road of the ethics of how we live on this planet. 150 species a day becomes extinct because of how humanity operates on this planet. So that's the quick answer to what led to the start of the nonprofit was the incredibly frightening research on this book.
Well, I want to say, first of all, as a futurist, as an economic development person and an engineer, one of the things that I like about this work, the question I've been asking and the work I'm developing is answering the question, how we share the future, right? So sharing the future and sharing the planet are the same thing. No planet, no future, right? And
that's great.
What I like about this book, and I'm showing it for the audience, is the fact that the way it's written is very concise and it's not an academic book. But more importantly, for me, it really resonates around the things you've been reading about the planetary boundaries, this conversation about, you know, there's the actual boundaries around which we can't do certain things. And then also there's a sustainable level we don't want to fall behind. As the woman in Oxford, Kate Wayworth, calls it, this is the donut in which we want to live. But how do we get that message out very quickly? And I think by borrowing this phrase, the Spaceship Earth, as well as we're all crew, these are thoughts and memes that can be very quickly translated into a broader, let's say, consciousness, which is what is needed for the paradigm shift. So I want to talk now about how, because, I mean, people can pick up the book, but it is, I mean, you quote so many organizations and numbers. Okay, let's look at one. One of the things you talked about is let's use this phrase, the Earth century. Now, in other terms, you're hearing people saying the Anthropocene. It's a very nice word for people who are very intellectual, so we like it. But now you have made it more accessible for people who are not the intellectual types, the Earth century. How do you explain the Earth century then to, let's say, an 11-year-old mid-school person?
Sure. I first came up with the concept in my book, Entering the Shift Age, back in 2012, because, you know, I write a weekly blog and I was getting all these emails. Why don't you feature our LEED certified building or something on Earth Day? And I got so mad, Claire, that people were using Earth Day as a marketing event that I said, it's not Earth Day, it's not Earth Week, it's not Earth Month, it's not Earth Year, it's not Earth Year Decade. That the 21st century speaking to 11-year-old, we now 7.5 billion people on this planet, and it is in this century that we have to make a decision about our ethical relationship with where we live. And that's where, I came up with the idea. And the other thing is, and I want to say this because you talk about the meme, and you're so right. As you know, we were both at the 50th anniversary of the World Future Society conference last July. And because it was in DC when I gave this Spaceship Earth speech, there were some interesting people in the audience, the result of which I was invited to speak at the headquarters of the EPA, which I did in early November. But even more exciting for me was that I was invited in to speak at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. And when I went in there, the top people at Earth Sciences, wanted me to speak to their scientists. To your point exactly, and I asked Dorothy Zucker, who was the woman who invited me, and I said, why do you want me to come in? And she said, because the NASA scientists are so frustrated because they're putting out all this great science, but they don't see any cause and effect of people changing. Yeah. And so I came in and I spoke. It was one of the great days of my life to be on there. And what the scientists and Dot also said to me, she said, David, the reason this Spaceship Earth works is you created the biggest metaphor possible, which is Earth is a spaceship and we're all on this spaceship together facing the biggest existential crisis of humanity. So it is the metaphor you're using which brings it in. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, because one of the things you talk about is this idea now. So we're here, we've gotten here, and you use the term forgive and face forward. You might recall when the Bolivian government, for the first time, I think maybe about 12 years ago, created a new law that allows Earth to be considered a person for the point of view of the courts. And it sent like shockwaves, oh my God, and people were pissed off. But by doing that, in a sense, it was trying to use the idea that given we have now made corporations persons, then the earth itself needs to be a person. And you talk here then about forgiving and facing forward, that we need to forgive ourselves and focus our energies on creating the response as opposed to what we did wrong, because at this point we can't go back. So tell me about how do we talk about forgiveness then in this situation where we're reacting to a possibility that the EPA is going to be rolled back?
Well, I don't care. It doesn't matter about the EPA. I mean, it's what we're about is survival and crewing our planet. Whether there's an EPA or not, that one of the interesting things is that people have come up to me since Trump got elected saying, isn't it bad? And I said, it's just the opposite, because everybody thought, oh, Obama's taking care of this. And in all the anecdotal evidence I have of green organizations, whether it's the Audubon or CCL, the amount of people who are showing up at meetings is 4 times as much as it was a year ago, because we see the enemies in front of us, right?
Yes.
So the thing is that and I'll give you an example. The 2 things that in all the research about green environmental organizations that come up with people is, number 1, I don't really understand as to what I do, how that affects climate change. And the second thing is, does what I do as an individual make a difference? So the concept of forgiveness and crew go together. So to the point of forgiveness, we have to forgive ourselves. No matter how green you are or I am, we're still stuck in the carbon combustion complex. We have to drive cars. When you eat a 1/4 pound of beef, that's 6 pounds of CO2 that goes up into the atmosphere because of the way we grow beef. So the concept is that we have to forgive ourselves. Instead of feeling guilty or everything. Hey, Henry Ford, when he scaled up production 100 years ago, didn't think he'd create smog in LA because there's only 1.5 billion people, right? So we have to forgive everything that we've done. We have to, there's no way that you and I can live a completely green life in this world. So we have to accept the planet as it is and move forward. Forgive ourselves. As you know, in any relationship, there's rough times, and the only way through it is to forgive, move on. And And it's almost, and you know, it is a, I know it's a perhaps inappropriate phrase, but it's a correct phrase. Humanity's been raping this planet. So we have to forgive ourselves for being rapists and say, look, we didn't know. We didn't know this would happen, right? I mean, when there's 1.5 billion people, if we were still 1.5 billion people, we wouldn't have climate change, right? It's because we're 7.5 and we're living, you know, as though there's only 1.5. So that's the problem. And interesting thing about Crew, Claire, is I didn't know this when I set up the nonprofit, but one time I made a speech and I said, I want to recruit 1 billion crew members. And it really clicked. And so we've done videos, for example, of scale, like acting as crew. And you can go to the website, thisspaceshipearth.org, and you can see how people act as crew. Like, for example, if I cut my beef consumption by 75% since this book came out, right? Well, what if 20 million people in the United States cut their beef consumption?
Yeah.
Or
I totally agree. Because the fact of the matter is that Rensselaer Polytechnic did a study that shows paradigm shifts in terms of social movements. Change went about 10%. So as an engineer, I've been looking at that number, and my the reason why I'm actually enjoying this conversation, my idea has been, okay, I need to find a way to get to 10% people. So I'm looking at talking to large organizations which are global. So because at the end of the day, as you rightly say, global challenges are lived one person at a time. So it's not like you have like a big sustainable development goal, but you don't have people who are making that shift. So you talk here about something which is also critical. You say 730 species living in a 1230 world, or vice versa. What does that mean for our audience? Because I want to get this out.
Claire, you know, it's really nice to be interviewed by somebody who is, 1, a futurist, 2, smart, and 3, has read the book. So I'm really enjoying this. Right? That is the one bit of science that we put into the book that has changed the conversation. Most of the conversation is about emissions, you know, 350 to 403. But the problem is, and it's even with the Paris Accord, is that at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was 730 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere. In 1970, we crossed 830 gigatons. And so from 1970 to 2015, we went from 830 to 1,230 gigatons of CO2 into the planet. So 2 points. One, that time, 1970 to 2015, is completely time congruent with the warming of the planet. So what people are always surprised when I give my speeches is that when carbon goes up into the atmosphere, it lasts for centuries, if not millennia. There is carbon that went up to the atmosphere when Columbus was discovering America. So it's not about putting less emissions up, it's about going up and getting. So we are a species that up until the Industrial Revolution lived in an atmosphere of 270 gigatons of carbon. Now it's 1,230. And that is why there is warming. Just think, and those people just don't understand that every single pound of carbon that goes up there stays there for decades, centuries, and millennia. And that's the problem we have. So we are a 730 species living in a 1230 world. And as you know, in our book, we say we got to get back down to 830. And that's why the Paris Accord doesn't even work. Here's the thing. I always ask when I give speeches, Claire, who is a school teacher? And somebody raises their hand. And I say, so the Paris Accord is like asking everybody to do less bad by 2% a year. So if you had a child, Johnny's in school, would you say to him, Johnny, I want you to be 2% less bad tomorrow? You know, you're either doing the right thing or the wrong thing. So even the Paris Peace Accord, if everybody signed off and actually did what they promised to do, and I don't believe that's going to happen, then that would add another 600 gigatons. Now, right now, we've crossed 1.5 degrees centigrade. That would take us up to 3 to 4 degrees centigrade, and there would be 200-foot sea level rise. So it is and the other thing we did, sorry to get so excited about this, but when you say parts per million, as you know, you're a scientist, you're a futurist, you understand that. But for people, I don't really get that. But when you say tons, and I can look, and the average American puts 16 tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every year. When you say that to somebody, it startles them.
So
You are
it's
responsible
about
for
changing the
6
language.
Yeah,
It's really about changing the language and telling the story very differently. And
right.
so we now move to this idea of you saying, so now we have forgiven ourselves, we know our numbers, we need a moonshot. And I think it's very important, this idea of moonshot, because with all this talk about going to the moon by 2030 and mining the asteroids by 2030, my concern is that we're not going to be doing space, actual moon, the way we did Earth. There needs to be some control or some thinking about what that might mean.
Right.
Unfortunately, I've been seeing and reading people are saying, well, the moon is just out there doing nothing. We're just going to go up and take it.
That's so stupid. It's like there's two characteristics that are unique to humans. First, we are the only species on the planet that creates waste. And the second is that we're an everywhere species. We can live everywhere. So we leave waste everywhere. If you go up to the moon, there's human waste up there. I mean, we shouldn't even think about going to another planet until we clean up this one, right? I mean, it's like going to the moon or going to the asteroids is a way to not have to pay attention to the fact that we're destroying this one. Oh, we'll get more resources from out in space. I mean, that's lunacy. I mean, I think that we should colonize Mars. I think we should do all that, but that's not the answer.
And how? But how exactly? How? So as you talk about this, I know you have to. We have to.
Yeah, we got a few more. I got about another 5-10 minutes, sir. Good.
Yes. So now we're talking about the things that humanity can do. What are like maybe 2 or 3 things that you think we can do easy to get us started? Because we like to race against ourselves.
Right. So the way to think about it is, if you are a part of a crew, that means you're part of a group of people. And so all of a sudden we can scale. The example I use when I give talks, Claire, is, and I'll do this with you, okay? So the idea is that the central issue about climate change is design. We have to redesign the way we live. We have to design new techniques. We have to redesign cities. We have to redesign energy and transportation, right? So that we have to change consciousness first, because what is happening now hasn't happened since man has been on this planet. So we have to change consciousness, which changes thinking, which leads to new actions. So here's one example, and I'll ask you, how much do you pay a month for your electricity bill at home?
Too much, $500 and something in the winter, in the summer around 300 and something, because my house is all electric.
Yeah, okay, because you have a big house then, and it's all electric. Okay, so when you get your bill, if in the wintertime it's 500, you say, as a price-oriented consumer, you say, okay, 500, and then you write the check, okay?
Yes,
or
but also live with more sweaters.
Right, well, yeah, but the point is, you know what the price is and you pay it. Now I'm going to ask you the second question. This is to the point of how do you act as crew. Okay. How many kilowatts are you using a month?
I have no idea.
Exactly. Even the scientists at NASA said, I have no idea. So what we're saying is the 2% solution. The average American household uses 1,000 kilowatts a month. So what we're saying is drop it by 2%. So next month you use 980 kilowatts, and then using 1,000 as a constant, 960, 940. In 6 months, you'll be down to 880. So what that means is, like when I get the electric bill, I don't look at the price so much as I look at the usage. So we're trying to say, okay, so you going from being at $500, a price acceptable consumer, to be an active crew member managing how much electricity you use, because both of us are caught in this carbon combustion complex. It's coming from fossil fuels, right? So once you start thinking differently, like I'm going to crew the planet by using less electricity, you move away from being a consumer to being a crew member. And if we can get that consciousness out to 1 billion people, we can solve climate change.
Well, I certainly am thinking that I can help do that. I'm a storyteller.
But you're a great storyteller, and just the fact that you're having me on here is great. And you know, Claire, you're a force of nature, and I really appreciate that. And on my behalf, you have to be there for me tomorrow.
So you know what? As we think about then, how do we ramp up on this spaceship Earth, the organization, and get more people involved? what are the ways in which people can get involved in the organization?
Okay, thank you for asking. First of all, it's pretty easy to think this spaceship Earth. So it's thisspaceshipearth.org. Thank you. And when you get there, there's a wealth of information about what you can do. There's a whole section on acting as crew, and I think there's 16 things up there that you can do. And sign up to stay in touch with us. And on that page, Acting as Crew, we're taking like up to 30 or 40-second videos that people shoot from all around the world saying, here's what I'm doing to act as crew. And so we're trying to get people to get involved and share ideas. So go to the website, thisspaceshipearth.org, sign up to be contacted. We have 5 times a week quotes. And as you mentioned, we have lots of quotes in those books because, you know, as you and I know, quotes really motivate people. So, you know, we have a 5-day-a-week quotes and 3 times a week news feed. And just by staying in touch with us and doing that, you know, you'll be making a difference. I guarantee you, if anybody is committed to wanting to do something with climate change and they go to our website, they will find something that will motivate them and actions that they can follow and take.
Well, I certainly will be doing that myself. Eat local, eat seasonal, eat fresh, know your source of your food, know how your seafood. One of the things people have been pushing for is relabeling. Perhaps electric company can start by relabeling or reprinting, redesigning the way they print the bill. Because if you print the bill in a way that the kilowatt hour comes up as a bigger number, you see it, you know, then you'll know.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
because it's so small, you're not going to read that small thing, but you put the dollar amount and you put kilowatt hour in a different way, different font, make it a design question. Now people begin to pay attention to that. Same thing with water. You also talk about be more conscious around the house in terms of having a usable landscape. So there's lots of really interesting ideas.
Yeah, so one last, this is, you know, I always, as you know, when you've heard me speak, I try to come up with things that are aha moments. So here in Florida, where I live, people think that by not having a pool, they're being environmentally conscious or something. And in Sarasota, where I live, it takes 16 swimming pools of water to keep a lawn green for a year. So we have the phrase, lose the lawn. Forget about having a green lawn. What does that do other than take up thousands of gallons of water at a time when there's children who are dying from dehydration on this planet, right? So it's time for us as Americans, you know, the American way of life, if everybody lived it, would be 5 planets. So we have to lead and change, right? Because we persuaded everybody this is the right way to live, and for the planet, it is the exact wrong way to live.
And that's a really nice place to probably wrap this up.
Okay.
Folks, you have heard it. We cannot live as a species that thinks that the world and the resources are infinite. We are living in a 1230 world today, but we should be looking at going back down to close to 730. There are 16 ideas or 16 themes in which you can find things to do in this book, Spaceship Earth. And we want you to consider signing up to be a member of the spaceshipearth.org. It's really beginning to have not so much a movement that goes out on marches, but a movement that is focused on having that internal forward march.
Right.
What can we do, as I recently heard a colleague at George Washington say, what can we do as individuals to move the planet forward in a way that allows us to also be alive to move it forward?
And one last thing, remember, we're not saving the planet. The planet's going to be here for 3 billion years. We're saving ourselves from ourselves. We are saving ourselves from ourselves. That's all we have to do is change the way we live. It's that simple. There are no passengers in Spaceship Earth. We're all cool. Let me just show you the logo for it's up there. Thisspaceshipearth.org, okay?
Yes.
Hey, Claire, you're great. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it. Good luck out in the march.
One last question. So I like to always ask all my guests, one word, are you optimistic, pessimistic, or neutralistic about moving this agenda to our 1 billion target number?
I am optimistic. I stand in optimism because I want people to feel optimistic, because if they feel pessimistic, they won't do anything.
Gotcha.
And there is no alternative but to change the way we think and act, period. And you have to be optimistic to think that if I get 1 billion crew members, that is 13% of the planet. And if we get the right, like people like yourself, we can change it. So I'm optimistic. I may not get to 1 billion, but if I get to 100 million, I will have made a difference.
Well, I think count me in as one more person in your crew, or in
Thank
our
you.
crew. Our crew, I should say, our crew,
Right.
because we're all in this together. There are no Captain Kirks to save us. We have to save.
No, we're all captains of the ship.
Thank you, folk. So
Thank you.
David Houle, who is the author of Earth Shift. He's also the Shift Age. I'm sorry. He's also author of this book, The Spaceship Earth, along with Tim Rumage, a planetary ethicist.
Yes.
And please visit www.thisspaceshipearth.org for more information. Goodbye, David.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Be well.
Safe journeys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, brought to you by the Futures Forum. For more, please visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Thank you for listening. Spread the word. Share the future.